Greetings to my English-speaking audience. In my two last videos in French, after the English one, it was the explanations about the double darshan, which I experienced from the mother on 18th November 1973. For what I have to tell you today, we will leap to the year 75, around March. In the meantime, as my own aspiration to do the integral yoga as well as I could, my own aspiration for that having intensified, I was feeling actually that the whole of Auroville was kind of sleeping, not intense enough, it seemed to me, in that direction. Whether I was right or not doesn't matter, but it was my feeling. And I was very happy when a new settlement was started somewhere in 74, I suppose. I was not noting down things at that time yet. It was started not far from Aspiration, where I had lived until then. So I kept my activities for the Auroville schools. They are starting educational system according as much as we could to the teachings of the mother and Sri Aurobindo, of course. But I asked to be admitted in that new settlement because I had seen the person who had started it recently. It was a young guy from America who had stayed first in the ashram for some time. I don't know exactly how long. And the settlement he had started was in a place where mostly there was a mango grove, just happening to be there. It was in between two canyons, coming from deeper inland, and which were going towards the sea. And in that area, that young man had been authorized by the ashram to put a flag from the mother on the post. So, and the personality of that young guy seemed to me to radiate more fire still for the divines and all the other persons and the places I was aware of in Auroville. So I did get admitted there it was normal at that time that if somebody specific was starting a new place, he would be the one who to select, to admit or not, to accept or not new people in that new place of Auroville that person was starting. So we were only very few there, something like 4 or 5 people to the most, including him. And for about 1 year, I was very happy living there in my own area, which was not exactly in the mango grove itself, but a little bit further, which was more of a cashew nut grove. That will have an importance for a different story, which I will tell later, not specially for today, but this is to give you an idea. So I was living quite isolated as compared to the aspiration huts, who were so close together that actually they were twin huts, and and then a whole little village of them. So I was in the middle of the trees, and I enjoyed to some extent my solitude. And because the rest of the day I was going to give my classes, etc. I had my normal busy day in the aspiration area itself. And for about 1 year, everything went quite fine as far as I knew. You see, I had arranged a kind of agreement between the mother and myself. I was kind of painfully aware that I was not yet able to feel her presence in my heart and to feel directly her guidance. So when I met that young guy, quietly within myself, between the mother and myself, I convened with her that because that young man was the very best person I knew of at that time, I would consider that whatever he was telling me, it would be the mother saying it to me, something like that. And then one day, as far as I remember, we were having some little meetings now and then. My memories are quite vague, except for what happened at some point about 1 year after I had moved there as the place I lived in. Somehow he came to see me personally, or we met, or anyway, well, we had a private talk together, whereby he told me that somehow in my personality I had some kind of defects which were making my presence in the place not really suitable. And so I probably would have to leave. This was a tremendous shock for me and quite alarming news, because you have to imagine, you see, I was still extremely dissatisfied with the entire world. It's meaningless life, shallow motivations for everything, when it was not worse. Auroville was actually the only place where I wanted to live, where I felt life was worth living. And in Auroville, what I felt really good had somehow shrunk to that very place where I'd been admitted and where I was living happily for about 1 year. And then that man was telling me that I might have to leave. I immediately told him, oh, please, this is not possible. Whatever the problem might be, now that you have told me, I'm sure I can correct it with the help of the mother. Give me 1 month, give me 1 month, and then if necessary, we can see about that again. He agreed to wait for 1 more month before taking his decision. So this was extremely important for me. So you imagine, I thought my aspiration had intensified already, but in the months that followed, it became a night and day things. And I kept praying the mother to help me and to change me as quickly as possible so that I could stay there and stay in Auroville. So this was quite a tough time. Still, I had to, at the same time, go on with giving my classes, etc. I had to pretend living a normal life, but actually I was in a state of emergency, kind of, all the time, in secret. And there was nobody at all I could share that problem with, except the mother herself. So finally, after 1 month, as agreed, I went to the hut of that young founder of that place to have that second meeting with his final answer about my continuing presence in the place. It was, his hut was with a first level above ground. So I climbed there and I found him sitting on one side of that kit hut roof. And so I sat on the other side against the wall, which was that facade of the hut. And we sat together in silence like that for a little while. He kept silent. And then he looked at me. and said very quietly, "I am very sorry, but really, it is better that you leave." I cannot express what his words did to me. Literally, I felt as if a knife, a sharp knife, had been plunged into my heart. And the pain was so terrible that I couldn't even scream. But I blacked out. I lost consciousness only because my back was leaning against that facade of the hut. I didn't fall. I was sitting with my legs crossed on the little light floor of the hut. My eyes are closed instantly, and I was in that horrible pain, unable to move, unable to think, and only aware of that, of the blackness. I had forgotten him, the place where we were, everything. I knew only of that terrible pain in my heart, which was deepening and deepening. And I became aware that from all my limbs, from my whole body, something had started to happen. I could feel the life force slowly withdrawing from everywhere, withdrawing and being kind of swallowed in that place of my heart, which had become a kind of black hole, swallowing all that life energy in me. And it was as if my very body, my physical form, in all its substance, was shrinking, hardening, and becoming a kind of hardened substance, more and more like a stone, but not an insensitive stone, a stone of pain, utter pain, and despair. Total despair. What was there for me? Nothing more for my life. There was no place in the world I wanted to be but Auroville. In Auroville, there was no place where I wanted to be but that place. And so that, to me, it was the mother who had just told me I had to leave. if the mother had rejected me. What was the use of my life going on? So I became aware that I was somehow dying. And I couldn't care less because nothing else mattered in life for me. Nothing anymore. But the pain kept increasing, although it seemed impossible. And the stone I was becoming was harder and harder, blacker and blacker. And the black hole swallowing my entire being was becoming more and more the only thing existing. Quite curiously, it is in that moment of void of thoughts that a strange memory happened to cross somewhere into my consciousness. Years and years back, when I was a young girl at home in my family. Like many other families at that time, anywhere in the world, my parents were keeping a subscription to selection of the Reader's Digest, something from America, some small magazines. And inside were portions, extracts from selected books. And at the end of each chapter, constituted by one extract from a certain book, there was to finish that specific page. They used to add questions, funny quotes, some little things like that, just to close up the page. And I love to look at that particularly. Not always the real chapters, but I was always looking at those funny things or interesting questions they were putting in those places. And one day, what I saw was a question indeed. It was an explosion. The sound of an explosion is boom. What is the sound of an implosion? And I had tried hard to find out, but finally unable to find out. I had turned the little book around to see the answer written upside down. And the answer was, the sound of an explosion is boom. The sound of an implosion is yup. And I found that fantastic truth. I kept repeating that sound, yup, yup. And I could feel how indeed it was a coming in. It was the contrary of boom. And it was yup. So in that rather terrifying situation I was in that hut at that specific moment. When that little memory floated in my consciousness, I only said within myself, without the slightest emotion, all right, I am doing my job. And my whole being was kind of extinguishing itself little by little. And almost everything of me had been swallowed into that darkness of pain and despair. When something which was left in my depths in an instant emerged, and it was knowing, saying, Mother is my eternal mother. She cannot reject me. She would never reject me. Mother, I will be called to her. All what is left. So the next instant, I found myself in a different dimension of reality. But this time it was not above. It was within. I found myself in a reality this time of where everything was made of love. How to explain that? The very landscape, everything, the bodies of the beings there, the trees, the flowers, the rivers, everything. Anyway, I didn't look around because I could see in the distance, Mother. She was sitting on a kind of throne made of light, of love, like everything else, that substance of love. She looked like some other from the ashram, but kind of glorified, what word to use. I knew it was her. And I started running towards her. And my inner vision, at the same time, was experiencing my running this time of joy towards her. And I saw myself suddenly entering that landscape. And the form I saw myself in was a little girl, something like between 6 and 8 years old, something like that, with a little dress like, you see, the year 60s, probably, I don't know what, but little dresses with many, and my little shoes, I was a little girl, and I was running as fast as I could toward my mama. And she was holding her arms towards me. With all the love in the world and the joy. And I leaped into her arms and she held me tight. And in her embrace, I knew, of course, she had never rejected me. How could she ever? I was a dear child. Since then, forever. Again, time didn't exist anymore. I was not aware of that reality around us. I was just with her in eternity, an eternity of love. And after God knows how many more minutes of that totally blissful condition, there, my consciousness came back to the surface in what seemed to be an instant. And my eyes opened. And there I was again sitting in that hut. And there, a few meters from me, on the other side of the hut, was that young man. His face showing the utmost astonishment. I realized my face must have gone through quite some changes in the moments preceding this moment when I was again really with him there. And I knew that without himself knowing, he had been so useful to me. It was thanks to him. It was thanks to those harsh words he had told me. That the intensity of my being had gone to such a level of agony and then of call to the mother. That this had enabled me to pass into that other dimension with him, where I had found the mother. This time so intimately. So my heart was full of gratitude for him. And with a beautiful smile, full of that gratitude, I looked at him and I told him happily, so I should leave. Of course, no problem. Where shall I go next? Do you know another place in Auroville where they would need somebody to help in the work, whatever? You see, now it didn't matter for me anymore. I had found Mother. I had her with me. In fact, I didn't need anybody anymore as an interpreter. So I could go anywhere, even outside of Auroville if one day it would be necessary for whatever reason. But if there was a place in Auroville, oh, the better. So he looked at me with incredulity. Found again his own composure and then thought a moment and finally told me, actually there is a place where they need somebody. There's a place, one beach of Auroville, the one which is called Austin Beach. That main person, Austin, has left, and the team of Aurovillians there who receives the kids from the schools, etc., along the week. They would need another person to join and to lead the team. You might be quite welcome there, he told me. So I smiled again, said, good. And I asked him if I had to leave immediately. And it so happened, this is how I know approximately the date when that whole thing happened. We were almost at the date of the 24th April Darshan. So he allowed me to stay until then and to move quietly only after that time. So I went down from his hut and went very quietly and happily back to my own hut. Full of Mother's presence, accompanied me. And of the inexpressible joy. Of that presence. Which is something I wish everyone in the world who is not aware yet of to somehow become aware. So you see, this was yet another darshan from the Divine Mother coming to complete a double one I had already received. And in such an intensely sweet demonstration of her love, her eternal love, not just for each of us, the souls, the growing soul that she holds in her arms of light and tenderness. Another step was to happen yet. Which will be also for very soon. But again later, I found getting the description by Schrocken of that inner space where I had found myself suddenly. On that day, where I almost died. Oh,